How long should your car last? This is a question we hear constantly on the channel. People are always reaching out and saying, you know what, I've got this car, I've got that car. How long should these vehicles last? There's a certain amount of miles that you can actually expect your vehicle to last. There's a way to take care of your vehicle to make sure that it lasts that time frame. And there's a point as well, which it's finally time to say, you know what, bye-bye. It's simply not worth it anymore. And that definitely is a conversation we're gonna have. So I'm gonna break those three major points down. Let's get into it now.
Life's too short to drive boring cars.
Firstly, I've had a lot of people say, well, some of the new cars will way outlast the older vehicles. And while there's some truth to that, I mean, you were to think back way back in the 50s, the 60s, and a lot of those vehicles just did not last all that long. 100,000 miles was an extreme stretch. In other words, many cars often needed top-end rebuilds by the time they were at 50, 60,000 miles. That wasn't uncommon. Today, it's not uncommon to see vehicles that make it to 50, 300,000 miles. 100,000 miles is no longer the stretch it once was. A lot of it was, of course, just the poor design of a lot of the technology, the quality in the upper end, but even leaded fuel. You know, the old leaded gases, you know, when you went to gas up, it said regular leaded or regular unleaded. Now that very lead was used to prevent detonation. It would help performance of the engine run smoother, run better. But as time went on, we realized it did two things. Unfortunately, the detonation was great, or the lack thereof, but it was health effects. Of course, as the fuel got burned, that lead in the fuel, you could get that distinctive odor. It wasn't good for health. It did actually prematurely wear out the engine. While it helped it in the short term, the longevity of the engine just wasn't there. Engines weren't designed all that well compared to today. You know, time went on, we start to hit vehicles, you know, in the 80s and the 90s, and then of course the 2000s. Manufacturers learned a few things about technology and how to build engines, how to make them last longer. And we finally start to crest to a point where we see engines that last hundreds of thousands of miles. It's not uncommon to find modern day Toyotas and Hondas, and you know, there's vehicles now that it's very common to hit 100,000, 150, 200,000 miles all day long. It's almost a laughable joke now if you have a vehicle that doesn't make 100,000 miles. As a matter of fact, buying a used vehicle is no longer a risk at 50, 60,000 miles, and in many cases that's just broken in. You're hearing people driving Toyotas that are going 200, 300,000 miles all day long, and it's quite humorous actually, because they're a very simple engine, and that's the key. That's a major part and component as to why some of these engines and how they can last so long. So because of a lot of these vehicles costing as much as they do, it's not uncommon to pay $50,000, $60,000 for modern day vehicles. It's not uncommon to pay $100,000 these days. Even an entry-level small SUV by one of the import brands, it's not uncommon to be paying upwards in that $40,000 to $50,000 range. So vehicles aren't cheap, and it should be in your best interest to consider doing what it takes to help it last longer. I mean, a lot of people like to throw away their vehicles every 3 to 4 years, and it's always nice to have something, you know, granted, that is nice and comfortable, has the latest technology, is fun to drive. I get it. You know, we do this once, we only live once, and a lot of people can justify it and say, look, I want a new vehicle, I want something fresh and cute. But if you're one of these owners that it's slightly more frugal, or you're worrying about, you know what, I want to save a little bit of my money, I'm going to stretch the longevity of the life of these vehicles, how do you go about doing that? How do you go about keeping your vehicle run longer, better? I've often owned vehicles 10, 15, 20 years old. I currently have a 2002 Toyota RAV4 that we own. This is a 2003 Ram. We have many other older vehicles. I have an older 911. It's also a 2001. And as you get the drift, there's a consistency you're starting to understand. We have a BMW because we used to like those cars as well. And it's a 2006. And that's still around too. So as you can see, there's a consistency. We like our older vehicles, not so much because I like old vehicles as I do because I can fix a lot of them. They're affordable in many cases, and certainly I'm not constantly swapping out vehicles. So how do I keep the vehicles around for so long? Well, there's a few things that I've learned along the ways. I've been fixing cars for many, many years. First thing, it's the fluids. Fluids and filters you have to be thinking about. Now the transmission is buried down in there, and I'm not going to get into showing you exactly where that is. We all know. There's this conversation about should you change your transmission fluid or should you not change it? It all depends. It's sort of a caveat conversation. If you buy the vehicle new and you want to start taking care of it from day one, absolutely. Change the fluid in your transmission regularly, as per the manufacturer's instructions. Now, there are certain brands that say it's lifetime fluid. That's pretty much bung. We know that. There are some manufacturers that say, look, the quality of the product of the oils they're using are good enough that they'll probably last long enough to be, a service life of the rest of the vehicle. That's not really saying much for the vehicle if you're saying that fluid will outlast the vehicle. BMW is one of those that put a sealed system and you don't necessarily have to change it. But if you change your fluid regularly from early years, then you're probably fine. And that's going to help extend the life of that transmission. However, if you're buying an older used vehicle, you're buying it off of one of the classifieds, and you see this vehicle and you're kind of, well, this is cute. You go along and buy it. The service history is sort of spotty. Maybe it has 150,000 miles on it, runs pretty good otherwise. That's a bigger risk, because if you change the automatic transmission fluid at that point, there's a good possibility that there's now contaminants that have built over time. By flushing it, now you're releasing some of those contaminants in that fluid, and if you don't get that out entirely, what ends up happening now, that winds up back into parts that could cause other problems. It's not uncommon to hear about people that have done that, transmission flushes on higher mileage cars, that all of a sudden start to develop a slipping or a juddering or a jerking or some other strange behavior. So it's sort of a mixed conversation. Automatic transmission fluid is something I've rarely personally done, because my experience has been driving older vehicles and I've just generally run them, and I've rarely had any automatic transmission failures. In all of my years, I've only had one catastrophically fail. Some things, in fact, though, I truly do believe are absolutely critical. Air filters, super critical, because let's face it, there's a lot of air getting sucked into that engine. Your engine uses a couple of major components: fuel, of course, the gasoline or the diesel you put in the vehicle, and of course air, and it goes through this filter box. Now, a lot of the places that we drive are dusty, dirty, winter, summer, and there's a variety of conditions. This helps keep all of those contaminants from going into the engine. I've heard of engines, diesel engines, by somebody using a cheap air filter, or even, I don't want to throw them, but some of those reputable, free-flowing air filters. I don't want to kind of mention any names, but what it ends up doing is letting more air in, and then they've dusted their engine. Essentially get air past the filter and getting dust in there. That is the surefire way of destroying your engine. So always having air filters that are in good shape, and change them regularly, at least as per owner's manufacturer's instructions. Down here, coolant, extremely important. Something that I've always considered changing, topping up, and making sure it's the right grade, making sure it's the right grade and product for your vehicle, and that you're never mixing colors. Always consistency with that. Make sure your water pump's functioning well, your hoses are in good shape, taking care of those elements, making sure your vehicle stays cool and runs properly. The radiator, make sure there's no leaks. If you have leaks, there's a higher possibility of dropping a fluid below its prescribed levels and possibly overheating. Once you overheat your engine, it's going to cost you thousands of dollars. Of course, engine oil, another conversation that a lot of people start to extend them. Manufacturers now are saying, look, you don't necessarily need to do these shortened oil services. A lot of manufacturers are saying, 12,000, 15,000 mile oil services. That's absolutely hilarious. You definitely want to do your oil services much more frequently. So again, I've always been of that idea, even with these modern, better synthetic oils, still, oil is cheap. Change your oil filter and change your oil at least every 3,000 to 5,000 miles, and you're guaranteed to have fresh oil constantly in your vehicle. So always changing your fluids. I can't tell you how important it is, in fact, to change the fluids in your vehicle. Keep the fluids in good shape, keep leaks at bay, change your filters. Even fuel filters from time to time are important to do. All of those elements will help elongate the life of your vehicle and keep it on the road much longer. Other things that help keep your vehicle around a lot longer are making sure that you're taking care of the suspension parts. You have all kinds of bearings and bushings and parts that start to squeak and wobble, and you get free play and movement in there, and that causes other damage. But unfortunately, what a lot of people neglect are things like shocks and struts. It's amazing how much damage a shock and strut can do. Some people go in there and they'll replace some components, and lo and behold, they'll find later on, within about a year or two, all of a sudden, they've got those same parts and they're having to change again. Or their tires, for example, all of a sudden have cupping and strange wear on them, or there's a shimmy or a strange driving behavior with their vehicle. Quite often, a lot of that comes directly from your struts and your shocks, because that's the dampening of the vehicle. As it goes ups and downs, it allows your vehicle suspension to articulate. But if the dampening doesn't work properly, you can get weird wear patterns all over your tires. So it might actually accelerate tire wear, it might accelerate suspension wear. So constantly making sure that some of those parts, the critical wear parts, and your struts and your tires are always in good shape. Brakes are also important, but that's more of a safety item. Ultimately, taking care of your suspension will take care of you. So your fluids in your suspension, I can't express how important it is to change those parts, and it just keeps this vehicle running down the road very, very smooth for many years. Now, it's great that I'm talking about this, because the next thing you really should be thinking about, if you live in one of the Rust Belts, northern US, the eastern coast, certainly in Canada as well, Ontario and Quebec and areas like that, that use a lot of salt on the roads, a lot of these states and provinces use too much of those chemicals, and it's imperative, if you want to keep your vehicle lasting longer, you should be constantly washing it. Now, granted, there's no way a vehicle from Ontario or from New York is going to last as long as a vehicle from California, because those vehicles in California simply are not exposed to the same conditions. The harsh up and down extremes, the plus 40, the minus 40, and all of those extremes, not to mention the salt and the sand that's used on these roads, are extremely abusive on these vehicles. California sits in a gentle breeze, the temperatures are 25 to 30, it's comfortable, and a lot of those vehicles just live an easier life. You don't have the salt and the sand, and generally those vehicles will last a lot longer. But you can still drastically extend the life of your vehicle if you live in some of those harsher elements. And a part of it is, as you see here, now my vehicle's dirty, I am literally, after I'm done here, heading off to wash my vehicle, because I truly believe in keeping it clean, both top and bottom, is extremely important to keeping the life of that vehicle. You're also going to feel better about owning the vehicle if it looks better. So keeping the salt off your vehicle helps keep the rust off your vehicle, and of course then ultimately you're going to want to keep it longer. These vehicles, of course, you want to get that salt off, because salt will eat away at the body. So it's important that you not just wash the body panels of your vehicle, but even in the suspension parts and the frame. You'll look down in there and you'll see frame parts that still don't have any rust on here, and it's extremely important to keep those parts clean. A lot of people wash the body panels but then neglect these parts in here, or neglect the lower sections of the rockers, and they don't even pay attention to that. But washing these lower areas is extremely important. Washing in here is extremely important. Washing under this area is extremely important. Doing all of that will help extend the life and the body of your vehicle, and you'll feel better owning it for much longer. Now, another big joke I had ongoing with a buddy of mine, he used to laugh, you know what, I had a burnt out taillight and all of a sudden I sold the car. He used to joke and said, you don't even like to change your light bulbs, you just change the whole car when your light bulb burns out. And it was a bit of an ongoing joke. Now, that's not really a reality, but a lot of people start to get that perception, and you know, they start neglecting the rest of the vehicle. A few things stop working, they start losing interest, they start neglecting other parts, not just cosmetics, but even mechanical. Next thing you know, that vehicle's a heap. There's nothing more you can do than a bit of a psychological exercise, and that is just getting the vehicle feeling good, keeping it clean, fixing the little things, not just mechanically, but you know what? All of a sudden you have a button that stops working. Troubleshoot that. A lot of these older vehicles are easy to troubleshoot and easy to figure out what's going on. You might have to pull out a panel, maybe a switch, get that power switch fixed, you know, for the power windows. Possibly there's other little widgets. Maybe this hasn't been working right. You know, put a little grease to it and get things functioning properly. Ultimately, nothing turns you off more about your vehicle than when the little things. It's the old broken glass syndrome. You know, you see a house with a broken window, then you see long grass, then a fence board that's missing. It gives other people this idea that the vehicle is neglected, or in this case, the home is neglected, and then it seems to attract even more abuse because it sort of draws people in as something that's neglected. Well, the same thing applies for a vehicle. The idea behind that is just take care of the little things and the rest of the vehicle will be a pleasure to own. Now, this isn't necessarily about owning a vehicle that's 40 years old, but as I've already expressed, a lot of the vehicles I own are, you know, around the turn of the century, the 2000 generation of vehicles. I own a few of those. And it's not by accident. It's because these vehicles just keep hanging around and keep hanging around because I look after them. And ultimately, by doing that, you're not spending that $50,000, $60,000, $70,000 on those new expensive vehicles constantly. And yeah, it's nice to drive down the road and have something that's got all the features and the sunroof and power everything and all of that latest technology and the big screens. Those things fail with time. And these older vehicles do feel like you can still fix some of these vehicles. Now, the ultimate question is, are the newest vehicles always worth buying? Are they more reliable? So is the old thought process of buying something brand new now, starting with a 2024 model year, you think that you're going to go out and buy yourself a 2023 or 24 model year vehicle and likely get the same time frame and the same lifespan that you would from a 2010 vehicle? Well, in my own personal opinion, I don't think that's necessarily the case. Time will tell. We don't really know until we know. But from what we can see, we've sort of hit the peak. We've hit a series of vehicles that, in my opinion, is in the 90s through to about 2010, 2015, where we've seen the peak. And then around 2018, 2019, I believe we've sort of crossed that point ever since 2020. And I think a lot of you would agree. Vehicles aren't necessarily built to the same standard. There are reliability issues. There are complexity challenges. There's higher numbers of recalls. There's more warranty claims. There's a lot of technology and a lot of parts and components and designs that now are hands-off. A guy like myself can't fix a lot of the parts in a lot of these modern day vehicles. And as a result, a lot of people are just going to face the fact that I can't afford these $220 shop rates. I can't afford to fix these complex vehicles. A lot of the technology that goes into these vehicles are extremely expensive. And you're going to find a lot of these vehicles built in 2021, 22, 23 are going to find themselves in the scrapyard much sooner. Not to mention, a lot of this newer technology is going to be slightly more problematic than vehicles that we saw back in 2010, 2012, or 15. Those vehicles were likely the pinnacle, and vehicles that are likely going to last a lot longer. So the next question is, when is it finally time to say bye-bye to your older vehicle? Well, I truly believe there's a lot of opportunities to keep these vehicles lasting almost virtually forever. A good, well-designed vehicle, some of the old Toyotas, some of the old Hondas, and even some of these old domestic vehicles. You think of some of the Chevys that were the old 350 cubic inch engine V8 engines from way back in the, the late 70s, the early 80s, and back, of course, up until they started really advancing the drivetrains. And with vehicles that have this cylinder deactivation and modern technology means a lot of those won't last like they used to. But the older 350s, 302s, 305s, Chevys, Fords, Rams with the 318s, a lot of those vehicles are around for hundreds of thousands of miles because they were simpler. They were designed quite well. While they were basic, they slow turned, and just doing a little bit of simple maintenance kept them running for a long time. But there will be a time when it's finally time to say bye-bye to these older vehicles. Is it when you blow an engine? Maybe a transmission? Are those the times that it's time to say, bye-bye? Maybe not necessarily. An older vehicle like this, even if this blew an engine today for about $5,000, I could put that engine in here and get hundreds of thousands of miles more, simply because there are some key underlying features to this vehicle. It has a net worth still of in that $6,000 to $8,000 in the US market. Canadian market, this vehicle is still worth $10,000 to $12,000 as it's sitting, believe it or not. So if I put $5,000 into it, I'm still ahead of the game, and I'm not spending 50 to 60 grand for a new vehicle. Not to mention, if this vehicle's rotted out and it's just full and corroded with rust, you may not want to throw a new engine in it. If it's just rotten from top to bottom, you don't want to throw all kinds of money at a transmission and engine combination. If in fact it has all kinds of electrical issues that have been plaguing this vehicle, maybe starting conditions, running issues, electrics that flake, that come and go, you could spend a lot of money diagnosing and troubleshooting electrical gremlins. That might be a time when it's finally said, say the engine's gone, the vehicle's rusting out, and it's got all these weird electrical gremlins that the dealers have tried to fix and they couldn't quite get it right. When you have a vehicle that's finally got too many issues like that, it's time to say bye-bye. At that point, you run what you can get out of that vehicle, and then it's just time to move on and move on to something next. If the vehicle is still fairly solid, the body's in decent shape, electrically it runs fairly well, why not change parts? You can always do suspension replacements. You can always put a new engine in there. You can even touch up odds and sods, even if it has a little rust bubble here or there. You can, chances are, if you take care of that, put a little oil to it, take care of the rest of the vehicle, you could probably still get another 5 years plus before it starts to look like a real eyesore. We all love new vehicles, and at some point, we're gonna buy new vehicles. Taking care of your vehicle in the way that I do has allowed me to keep my vehicles for decades. And if you like to keep your vehicles around and keep money in your pocket like I like to do, certainly there will be a time that you will have to replace that. But why fast track it? Look after it. Do those oil services, fluid changes, filter changes, and you too will get the most out of your used vehicle.